Hi, Teni Dicely here. If you've been enjoying these Dungeon Master Roundtable episodes, be sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel and ring that bell to get notified when new videos go up. The topic you're about to watch today is just one of a few that were covered during a live-streamed episode on the Dicely DnD Twitch channel. The music you'll hear in this video was created by Tabletop Audio, and I'll let our guests introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Fred Wheeler. I run the How to D&D YouTube channel. I talk about Dungeons & Dragons, mostly 5e right now, and I do talk about other RPGs, and I'm the one who wrangles everybody into these things usually.
Hi, I'm Logan. I am one of the players in the Play Dicely D&D campaign, and off of Twitch and YouTube and stuff, I DM a home game that Teni used to be a part of.
I'm Jordan with Flutes Loot. My wife and I, Opal, do a YouTube channel for D&D variety topics, as well as our website, flutesloot.com. We kind of specialize in her doing lore and crafting magic items, especially magic item formulas. And I'm big into improv and crunchy numbers, as well as reviewing things. So between the two of us, we get quite the spread of content. Happy to be here.
Let's move on to the next topic here. So, to add breath of life to a setting, at least in my opinion, coming up with some form of history can help tremendously. But creating history for our setting does, take some time, so, you kind of have to prioritize your DM prep. So what are your thoughts on including history in your original settings, and how much history do you establish, if anything? We'll go in the opposite direction this time. We'll start with Fred.
You've heard my opinions on this sort of thing, and you know my approach to my own campaigns. So I include very little history to my own original settings. It's if there's anything, it's probably one sentence. And as Denny knows, I am very prone to simply getting a piece of paper and squiggling a few lines on it, and 30 seconds later I'm ready to go, and I haven't done anything. So I sort of build everything as I go, based on what the players do and, how I'm feeling at the time or what I feel like putting in there. So I kind of figure, like, after 50 years, I've been exposed to enough stuff. I shouldn't have to worry too much about trying to figure this stuff out in advance when I don't have the time to do that. So I just do it as I go. That's just sort of my approach. But when it comes to history, plays a really big part. I probably read more about history and watch more videos on history than I do Dungeons and Dragons. Frankly, because it's more interesting. Even my own stuff, I'm like, oh God, is that guy talking again? Yeah, but I think that's where I get a lot of my ideas. And so I poured a lot of real world history over to my games in terms of locations, deeds, events, monsters, legends, all that sort of stuff. So because I'm porting a lot of that stuff over and I know about that stuff already, I'm kind of just building it as I go. And I mean, I might do some prep, but it's very, very rare. So a lot of the history behind an original setting for me is not really that original, because it's actually based off something that I've come across or seen or heard about. And there might be a slight tweak, but it's not really a tweak that you could sort of say, okay, I can stamp a copyright on, that was mine. Do you know what I mean? So I guess that's my approach to sort of dealing with history, but it's not just a way of dealing with history. I deal with all of my original settings like that. It's not really very hard and fast. It's not a lot of prep. I've done that sort of thing before, and it never really helped me, so now I just don't do it at all. And I feel like, all of us as we were growing up, we were exposed to so much history, and it's so varied wherever you are, different parts of the world and what things happen, and we wind up utilizing a lot of those concepts in our games. I generally feel, I see it in other people's histories when they write up a history for a world. I'm like, oh, I know where they got that from. Oh, I know where they got that from. And I'm doing the same sort of thing. The only difference is I'm not really writing it down. It's just in my head, and then I write it down when I feel like I need to. So yeah, I don't know if that's useful to anybody though.
I'm sure somebody can use that, absolutely. Thank you, Fred. Logan, what are your thoughts on using history in original settings?
Yeah, I think for myself at least, I also don't often, at least going into the start of it, I don't write a lot down beforehand. So I don't know what's going to necessarily be fully important to the character, like the players. So I always start as like, oh, what's like the one or two things I need to know to get things going, and then I figure things out as it starts to become a bit more important. It's actually a little strange right now, the campaign I'm running now being a sequel to one. There is like established lore that came up, so now it's like, okay, this is starting to leave like some more holes that I'm filling for myself. I don't think my players realize this, or if they do, they're not, being like, oh, this doesn't make sense yet. But it's suddenly like, oh, this happened. Why is this like this? Okay, let's start, figuring this out. But yeah, mostly if I am doing it, it's mostly for myself. It's not something, I'm not giving my players like a document being like, well, here's the history of things, because I know they're never going to read it. I know my friends, they're never going to read it.
No point in wasting the time on that. Anyway. All right, then we shall move on to Jordan.
My answer is, at its core, it depends on my players. Like my wife, Opal, she loves uncovering lore and history behind different locations, and that to her is part of exploration. Like Denny, you and Fred have spoken with me about exploration, and having that history is a big part of the exploration fun for her. So when I have players like her, yeah, I like to prepare a bit of history behind the locations and some special sites that she can uncover things, and there's a sense of satisfaction of figuring out those mysteries and learning that lore, especially if it feeds into the plot in subtle ways. Like you might learn about some alliances that you wouldn't have known about, or a powerful creature that lives in the land that you didn't know was present. Can that be leveraged against your common enemy? Stuff like that. And so that was even just last night we were playing Tomb of Annihilation. My dad's DMing it, and he included a whole bunch of history that afterwards she said this was one of my favorite sessions. Learned so much. So when I have players like her, I definitely load stuff up. Other players, I tend to kind of fall back on my improv background and just having consumed a lot of lore videos and reading, because I don't have to front load a bunch of lore and history into different locations. I often have like maybe some micro concepts of like going back like 1 or 2 generations based on like the NPCs or monsters they're interacting with, like their personal histories. And then after that, it's just like macro concepts I keep pretty vague. But when it does come up, they say things like, oh, like, 30 sessions in, and they're like, oh, I'm a half-orc. Hey, Jordan, by the way, where do half-orcs come from? Or where do orcs come from? What's my heritage? And I have something, at least a canned response based on established lore that I can then say, yeah, this is fine to make canon history in this setting too. I didn't have to think about it ahead of time and be like, oh, in this setting, what is canon for where orcs come from? Just if it came up, I had something ready, and that is a comfort. Sometimes you gotta completely make something up. Sometimes you have some other stuff in your back pocket that you can spring out in a moment of need. But generally, that's how I go about it. Depends on players, and then if they're not heavy into history as an exploration reward for them in the gameplay, then I tend to have 1 or 2 generations of micro history and then pretty vague macro history.
That sounds like a very solid system there, Jordan. And it kind of reminds me, like, with my current game I'm running, like, half of the players have created scholars for characters, and everybody's very lore heavy in this campaign, and I'm like, I need you guys to get out of the libraries and go adventuring, please. You're not going to find everything in the library. But, players love what they love. My thoughts on history within original settings, it's you guys have pretty much touched on everything that I kind of think. I think it's nice to have one big event that is kind of overshadowing the setting or the campaign. It might not be like the center of the campaign, like Skyrim and the Nords and the Thalmor issue. It's like it's there, and it's something that everybody talks about, but it might not be the spotlight of our story, you know? And I think it's nice to have that one big thing ready during character creation, because then you can put it forward to the players and be like, if you want to bite onto this, this is a thing that's happening right now. And if they do bite, they'll be like, okay, well, this is how it's affected me, and maybe I've got some sort of stake in this. You know, it's something for players to use as well. And at this point, you know, don't invest too heavily in it. Just be like, this thing. kind of what you were getting at there, Jordan, you know, macro kind of things. It's like, this is just general. If we want to get into it, we will. And on the issue of, like, you know, when players ask those specific questions of, like, where's my heritage from? For me, I kind of have to play, like, quick connect the dots. It's like, well, if this is this, and this is this, and this is this, then logically we can put them up here in the north. I don't have anything there yet. They can fill that spot. And that'll be the way it is. You know, it's kind of, we make it happen because it has to happen because the story needs to go on. Or hopefully the players will, depending on the kind of players you have, they'll be like, I've written this backstory and is this okay? And I'll be like, perfect, I don't have to worry about the heritage of orcs anymore, because that was not on my to-do list.
Yeah,
and I mean,
setting is great for that is having like an overarching, let's say, like event that everyone knows about, is Eberron, because there was the big war, and then something like a nuclear wasteland was made of one of the big cities, and it's a mystery what happened. And that war affected everyone, so everyone can kind of tie their backstories to, did they have a part in the war? How are they doing now? The Warforged are great for that because they were created for the war. That was their purpose. And now what? You know, now what are they going to do? So the Eberron's a great example of what you just said, for sure. And another thing is, I've kind of told myself that next time I run a homebrew campaign, because I've done a lot of established modules lately, is I want to give players more freedom, like you were saying, of, well, where do you think you're from? On the map, there's some free real estate here. Where do you think your people are from? What are they like? That's something I want to embrace more at character creation, or on the fly in the middle of a session. If I think, oh, what are your ideas to the player? And if they don't have any, yeah, I can fill in some gaps. But I think that's a great way to help them co-author their own stories, and and it helps you as the DM for sure.
Yeah, I think we can open this up to roundtable discussion at this point, because I pretty much finished all my thought there. But you just reminded me of something else there, Jordan. In our campaign, kind of going on that idea of, you know, presenting to the players, where do you think you're from? I asked my players, like, what does the place you're from kind of look like? You know, is it foresty? Like, I kind of try and get the sense of a biome. And then I go, okay, well, these are some candidates that seem suitable. And going through that process, one of our players actually ended up being from a forest that is the same forest that Logan's character is from, except for, like, his people were there like 300 years before, had to leave, and now her characters from there, like, resettled the land. And it's an interesting little facet that exists within, like, the player group.
I was gonna say, off of what Jordan said, yeah, I think going forward, I really want this idea of, like, how do the players get to actually influence the world before they're playing in it, and a system that I really like, and I'm probably going to steal this idea from, I think it's the Fate system. You have, like, everyone writes a little bit of a story, and then the player on the left adds something to it of how they know you. The player on the right adds something to it. You can't change something that's already on the page, but you get to contribute to that. And I think that's, like, I've used it a few times for ways of helping with the world building, and it's something I think going forward I want to do more. Because the one thing I am finding in my current campaign is it's like everyone feels very disjointed to their, like, ties to the world itself. And I was like, oh, I think getting them invested in something they've actively created saves me work. That just makes it more fun for them.
I think that's smart, because a lot of people say, like, at session 0, figure out how your characters know each other. And I have had, like, probably 3 session 0s in a row where I say, okay, so you kind of know your characters are. Let's take a moment. I'm going to go to the bathroom. Everyone figure out, like, maybe some ways that your characters know each other. And I come back, and they, like, said nothing. For some reason, people have the hardest time saying just, how do we know each other? That's really hard for some reason. So if you find a system, whether it be from Fate or whatever it is, to kind of codify that and force them to do it like an improv exercise and take turns adding ideas, that's a great way to do it, because I'm sick of pulling teeth to get them to know each other.
So I was going to talk about history, but I just wanted to respond to Jordan's comment there about pulling teeth, trying to get players to figure out how to have connections, and Logan's strategy, which I think Logan's strategy is great. I've played Fate, so I know what he's talking about. But years ago, Jordan, I came across this, and I was like, I'm so sick of having to deal with this problem. Like, why is it that I have to do all the work and the players can never sort of like, can't they just say, oh, we're brother and sister, or, you know, he's my niece's nephew's uncle, or something like that? I mean, can they not find some way of doing this? So I sat down after piling through all sorts of resources, and I wrote a list of 32 different ways that you could connect your character with somebody else's character. And so when I go to session 0, I pull this piece of paper out and I dump it down on the table, and I say, okay, you got to make some connections. Here you are. Now I'm going to go and have a shit. Well, you sorting it out, pick something. Okay, if you don't like those, then make something up. But as long as there's something there, and if you can't make something up, then pick something. Pick something. On the other side of the piece of paper is my group rules, like my social contract. So I deliberately did that because of that very, very problem. But going back to history, now one of the things, I really like history, but one of the things I've had to sort of understand, and then when you try to apply it to a fantasy world where you're creating your own original place from scratch, is it's very hard to get absolutes with history. The thing about history is it isn't absolute quite often. It is, in our own real world, like history, knowing the absolute is usually unachievable because there was nobody there. I mean, there was no one initially still alive that was back there right when that event happened. Now, if it's a fairly earlier, new event, and it hasn't happened that long ago, then that might not be the case. You've got some actual facts, or you might have some video footage or a photo or something like that. But a lot of that kind of gets lost. And in a fantasy world, we don't necessarily have those sorts of recording devices anyway. So it's a lot of information that might be put in stone, but is it actually true? And it's sort of like history's the unknown. It's what makes adventuring quite interesting, because you don't actually need to have a lot of it. Having one sort of commonly accepted history is great. But the thing is, with commonly accepted history, it may not be the truth. It may in fact be a complete lie and a sham that's been passed on from generation to generation, and you can actually build that into your adventure in some way. Now that can add a level of complexity and confusion for players, so if you've got players who don't like confusion and complexity, they don't do it. But I kind of view history like, okay, so we have one absolute, which is really probably unknown and unachievable to be known. So that means that when we deal with history, we're dealing with multiple views. So within your world and the different cultures that are there, there's probably a different view of what the history is depending on where you are. Do you know what I mean? And that is probably the more interesting aspect to history, where you have to dissect, for what's been left behind, what the actual truth is, which you may never know. So, but again, so I feel like you don't need to be, even if you have a history, you can still make modifications to that, and you can still have a different history as well, because it's told by a different culture. No. The Tarrasque was defeated many millennium ago. This great beast, it's gone, it's destroyed. And then another culture said, well, no, actually, no. No, we managed to drop some sleeping pills down its throat. It fell asleep, and it's sleeping underneath a mountain right now. So don't go and piss it off. You know, so the history for how things turn out can be different depending on what you're dealing with here. Yeah. Anyway,
that is fantastic advice. Like, yeah, you don't have to play hard and fast with history. I've been doing that a lot myself. It's just like, this is the history. Or is it? It's actually a really fun experiment to try too. It's like, tell the player something and it's a lie. Though don't overuse it, because you kind of still want to maintain trust at your table.
Yeah. One thing that Logan said, and you kind of just triggered my memory on it, was that players don't notice the plot holes because they don't look at the lore like you do. When I'm a player, sometimes I think I perceive a plot hole, and it's kind of awkward because I don't know if the DM genuinely wrote a plot hole or if they're presenting information that is kind of coming from different sources, like what Fred just described. And sometimes I'm like, should I ask the DM, like, is this... So sometimes in character I point out, like, this doesn't seem to make sense, and I just kind of see, like, because then I kind of let the DM in the background be like, oh, do I have to fix this in some way? And then I don't have to worry about it because they'll fix it. Or will a character or will someone point out that I just forgot something? That it's kind of a weird position to be in as a player, unraveling history and lore from the DM sometimes, because you don't know what's on purpose or not. And then you said you're DMing for a bunch of scholars, Denny, like scholar characters. And it just reminded me of that meme of, like, I don't fear TPKs, I fear the Nat 20 history check and stuff like that. That can be rough.
Oh gosh, get it. Oh, wow. Oh dear. There was something I was wanting to comment on there and I totally just lost it. For the DM who ends up in that situation where a player kind of calls you out, the trick is, just always, or did I? Just always be confident.
Do you know, Jordan, your response is like the perfect response, because what that does is, one, if you have found a plot hole or an incomplete component, a Dungeon Master can fix that, and you'll never be the wiser as to whether that was actually done intentionally or by accident. It also means too, because if a Dungeon Master has built inconsistencies into there deliberately because the recorded lore or recorded history for the world is not actually the same everywhere, and you spotting that, you may actually be spotting a vital clue that it drives and pulls you forward in the right direction. And that's what, often this is what happens with an adventure, is you'll have things that are presented to you, because I don't know how you guys feel, but I feel like a Dungeon Master is like a magician. The magician who has the hat and then suddenly pulls a rabbit out of their hat, but they don't actually have a rabbit in their hat. The rabbit was somewhere else. And so you've got to sort of decipher all of that sort of thing to find out where to go. So I feel like often Dungeon Masters will present something or an environment or something, but there's something in there that's not quite right, and picking up on that can be very important, particularly with like mysteries, because mysteries, no matter what, even though the history may not be long, like if we're dealing with a murder mystery, you're looking for the inconsistencies there within that mystery so that you can discover what the actual truth was, or as close to it as possible. So yeah, just thought I'd add that.
And now I know why you always wear that hat, Fred. You're a magician. You're a DM, right?
And that brings us to the end of this discussion on whether history is necessary for your D&D games. Be sure to check out the YouTube channels of our guests who were with us in this video. You can find the links to their channels down in the description below. And until next time, may you always play Dicely.